there, but it would probably be a good time now for us to start making some of our concerns and or questions be heard about the interlocal agreement.
I'll start and then I'm gonna pitch this to Larry and Randy as well. The interlocal agreement you have was a draft that is probably about 2 or 3 drafts old, actually. There has been, the electronic wires have been heating up all weekend with revisions and terms and so forth. We are really not prepared we don't have a draft to share with you tonight that shows any of the latest revisions. We will have one this week, but I would like, Larry, if you would, to go over what the discussions have been to this point in time, if you feel comfortable
And let's
with
be
that.
clear, I don't think we're obligated to discuss this matter at our next meeting. I don't think we have a gun to our head. I don't feel that way. Maybe the developer does, maybe the CDD people do. Other than our
Are we legally
word,
required to discuss this?
it's my understanding we don't. The petition to interlocal is just that, it's a request. So I want to have clarity. That being said, if it comes to us in its current state, I can vote it right now. But so there was a question specifically, Larry, that was posed to you if you wanted to.
Well, we've been negotiating intensely, including today during the meeting. I'm getting emails from Kim. Mr. Arden has had the most recent communication with counsel for the district and developer. But I can tell you where we're at generally, and I'll try to be very brief. It's 8 o'clock at night. The EIP concept that we are proposing.
And I don't know what an EIP is, if you could.
The economic incentive payments. Those are the payments that the city will contractually agree to pay if you enter this ILA, this interlocal agreement. And I'll tell you some of the protections we're embedding in this would be, number one, the amount of payments the city will make. I'll just refer to the city payments as opposed to EIP, will never be more than the amount of debt service that is required on the bonds. So if for whatever reason revenues are just extremely high and you can pay debt service in a given year, you're capped at the debt service. Secondly, and we're negotiating towards these points. We haven't reached total agreement on this, but we're trying to limit the definition of a qualified bond to a bond that, number one, only builds infrastructure in the city of Winter Park and in the district. We'll want to have more detail about the improvement plan. Every bond issue has an improvement plan prepared by a district engineer, and that can be very important later if there is a default and they're dealing with a new entity that controls the new board of supervisors. It has been my experience that the new team will come in and value engineer and try to maybe not do the construction quite as nicely as Mr. Bellows would. And so with the end game being they want as much money left over in the construction trust accounts as possible. And so you get into real arguments and nuances. So we're working on, that's another area that we're dealing with them on. Another area with the issue of qualified bonds, we want to make sure that there's some reasonable control over soft costs. We say the bonds have to be used just for the development and construction of infrastructure in the city of Winter Park and in the district. But to some extent, architectural fees and engineering fees, soft costs are built in, and so you start to debate back and forth whether qualified bonds can be used to purchase right-of-way from the developer that the developer is willing to sell to the district. Are there going to be developer fees or management fees? So we need to have a discussion with them about some controls. Another point that we're working on is to limit the revenue sources to those things that we feel we can reasonably measure. And so in the latest version we've proposed, it's a 50-50 split on on non-ad valorem funds, which are equal to incremental increase. And that's another point. We're being very, very clear with covenants of non-appropriation. None of this relates to or obligates the city's taxing power. There's no ability here to require the city to raise millage or no direct access against your ad valorem revenue, but we're simply agreeing to essentially pay them incremental financing equal to the difference between, and actually from subtracting the baseline. You take the value of the property in the baseline year and you subtract that from the value of the property in the future year. Half of the tax arising out of that would be non-ad valorem incremental payments, 50% of that.
And if I could interject, that is a change. Mr. Bellows has agreed to reduce the 75% in the initial years to 50% for the entire term. So that was a change from what you had before.
That's right. They've agreed to do that to try to make it a little more feasible. We've taken out certain revenue sources that it's going to be hard for the city to account that the revenue is attributable just to properties developed within the district. So we're only going to share that incremental increase. We're only going to share half of the city's public service tax for electric service, half of the city's electric service franchise fee equivalent, and an amount equal to half of the city's 10% public service tax for water service. When I say we're only going to, these are the negotiating points where we can come back to you and say, if you as a policy matter want to entertain this concept, we think this is reasonable, it's measurable. You're not going to get into debates whether or not revenue paid from within or from inside the district or outside. So that's the revenue issue. The only other big issue that we're going to have to talk about with them is the question of, and I'll tell you what the issue I'm trying to prevent from occurring. I don't want them to issue a large sum of bonds and hold those monies in construction trust accounts, and then the CDD only goes so far into the actual construction, leaving large sums of money in bond trust accounts, and then the landowners default, assessments stop coming in, the CDD now forecloses. What usually happens is they get a foreclosure judgment that's assigned to a special purpose entity controlled by the bondholders, and then those people come in and value engineer the heck out of the construction improvements, so you really don't get what you contemplated getting with Mr. Bellows' demonstrated history of development in Hannibal Square, for example. You're dealing now with banks and their consultants, because that's been my experience, and they try to look at the construction improvement report developed by the district engineer and value engineer it, because there's financial incentive for them to preserve as much as possible bond proceeds in those trust accounts and not spend them on construction improvements. And so my concern is you could be on the hook for 30 years paying EIP if we're not careful. So that's a huge issue. I'm sure they're not loving, that's a huge issue we have to work through. Those are the major points. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So Dory and Larry and Randy, for me, it kind of begins with, do we even do an interlocal agreement, or are there other ways to accomplish improvements, et cetera, that in some cases I think are the city's responsibility, in other cases maybe a developer's responsibility.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's one more point I wanted to make. Also, in my experience, if a special purpose entity takes over following a default in assessments, not only do you have that value engineering issue, but the timing issue. I've seen that the bondholders will let projects stay fallow, waiting and waiting and waiting until they think the market is opportune.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
And that speaks to why I wouldn't agree to this interlocal agreement as is. I want to create something that appropriately incentivizes what needs to get done there in an appropriate time frame. That does it with what I would suggest existing and/or close to existing mechanisms. So, case in point, Winter Park, through the long process, is putting the sewer in Fairbanks. Now, we don't know what that is or isn't gonna do to development on Fairbanks, but we did that partly as a health safety issue as well as partly as an economic development issue.
Yes.
And we haven't obligated everybody to hook up to that yet, but if they're gonna build something there, they would. And if they did hook up, and I don't know what the actual time frame is, but I remember when my parents, when the sewers came down Buckingham, and they were obligated to hook something up, and the city at that time, I think, had some sort of an agreement that said, you know, this will cost you this much, but you'll get this time to pay it back, and it was done. I think that was the way it was done. I don't know if it was hookup fees or whatever. You know, the electric utility to me is a separate conversation, one that's very important that we serve that area at most costs. I wouldn't say at all costs, but I think it's very, very important that we serve that area. And there might be things that we may do to incentivize there that might be different than what we would do in wastewater, for example. Minimally, and there's probably pros and cons on this, and I'm sure we could debate this all day long and all night long. I'm not sure why, as has been done in other larger developments in Winter Park, with the exception, I guess, the village roads are not, those are still private property, I guess. But roads, drainage, et cetera, I think come to the city more quickly than 35 years, which is in the current interlocal agreement. If I'm gonna have to maintain it, I just soon own it from the get-go, even though that I might be buying a lot by saying that. I think I'd rather do that personally, because I think I as a city have some control over that. So, you know, there's certain things that I think that we can do to be of help, and there's certain things that we're in the business of doing. We're in the business of roads and parks and wastewater and electricity, personally. I don't know that we're in the business of, other than doing that well for everybody, giving any developer or anybody an advantage over anybody else, homeowners association or CDD, that may let something else happen more quickly or not. And frankly, I think some of that we're probably required to do just because we've annexed it. And I'm personally not troubled by that, because there's gonna be some incremental increase that occurs, and just like we're putting a sewer down Fairbanks, we've done the math and said that was a good thing. And we ultimately are paying for that through numerous mechanisms. Took us a while, but we're doing it. And we hope to have a return on that at some point in the future, at least to pay for those costs, which I think will happen. That would be much more the approach than, you know, I'm very disturbed by sharing ad valorem taxes for what seems like eternity held, what, 85, 86. Even incremental. I would much rather have something that creates, and I don't know what that incentive might be, but it's something that says, if you shall do this by a certain time, it shall become. You know, something that we could share that would make abundant sense for our citizens, versus saying a promise of forever. Now, you know, there's a lot of I think built-in security in the interlocal agreement as presented. So I'm not concerned, nor do I. You know, I've read some of the emails that have come across my desk, and this isn't. You know, I don't think we're being risky here. This is a delta of something that's not there. So it's something more, and therefore we would be sharing part of that. But I don't want that to happen over 30 years either. I think the worst thing that would happen is that over the next year, they can only bond $5 million of stuff instead of whatever they think they need, which I guess we did the math to where at 9 or 10 million of real infrastructure that would come even from our capability. If I'm gonna be on the hook for it, I wanna own it. So I guess I would say, I appreciate us reacting to the interlocal agreement, which you presented before us. I would feel cleaner if we even thought that was the right vehicle. And we're not here to discuss that tonight, but I think a lot of things could get done in similar fashion, but without an interlocal agreement. I also think that I'm not sure I want to react to somebody else's interlocal agreement. I
think I'd like to state what I think is reasonable, what I think is legitimate, and a lot of the terms in that one. I mean, we can react or we can start with a new one, whichever way you want to do it. But the reaction to some of it is just not acceptable to me. I'm speaking for myself on one vote. But the goal to do something that lets things happen more quickly, just like has happened in, I mean, we've done electricity to sites before, we've done various things, that sewers and all, that let something happen. You know, and let that entity ultimately help pay for that is a good thing. A question I have, and I don't know if this is a good idea either, but can I tax a part of the city differently than another part of the city?
No.
Can I tax a special taxing district? Can I create a special
You can do
taxing
special
district?
assessment.
Yes.
Pardon me?
You could do special assessment.
So I could do assessments on the Ravaudage property for X number of years to pay back.
But so can the CDD.
Yeah, but that would be their business. I mean, if I'm gonna put in roads,
Right, but that's.
I could tax that specially and.
Create a special district.
Of course, nothing might happen and I might be getting blood from the tournament.
That's what-
I mean, there's multiple ways this can accomplish this goal, and that's what I want to consider. I think there's multiple ways outside of an interlocal agreement to
Absolutely.
accomplish infrastructure as well as hopefully to help the city. And that's what this is about, is ultimately, I voted for this because we want to improve the tax base of our city. This can happen. This can happen with more retail there, with some homes, et cetera, that can happen. So I don't know that I want to go part by part with the interlocal. I would just say, again, in my comments, it's DOA. It's DOA at 35 years. It's DOA at sharing revenue, but that doesn't mean that there's not some obligations that I think the city has. And I think that just like we promised other neighborhoods of this community by annexation that we were going to get sewers done, I think we've got to address some of our northern neighborhoods where we made promises in 2002 and 2003 that I don't think we put sewers in yet. So I think, in fairness, we need to help them too. But I would see this much more along the parceling this out to some of the pieces. And I was specifically using the guide of what needed to be done, which was, there was a page in the initial, either interlocal or in the packet that we got originally, that described multiple things that needed to be done. And it was Exhibit 6A, estimated infrastructure construction timetable, and then there was a price tag associated with it under item 6B. And if I started to look at that, I look at certain of these things and say, you know what, I think it's probably the business of the city to be involved with some of this. And be helpful to this as we would to be any part of our community. Wastewater system lift station. That sounds like something we would do. I'm still reflecting on Jerry's video of the big things that could go boom, but I don't know if this is the original or not. I think this might be the original. You know, you're looking at some of the things that might have to happen for wastewater, et cetera. Those are kinds of things that I think are probably something that we need to address. And there needs to be creative ways to address it. For me, it may be creative in each way. I mean, there may be a specific thing by our utilities or by our, wherever we have, and I don't say set precedent, but the policies that we've implemented before. So the whole thing still may get done. It just may not get done with an interlocal that has 35 years of sharing with there's numerous ways to drive to Chicago, and I'm suggesting the one that's been mapped out in this AAA triptych's not the way I'm going to travel. Personally.
Mayor, if I could, they have already agreed that once the bonds are satisfied, either by foreclosure or payment, so it's not necessarily 35 years if they're able to pay off the bonds sooner, so.
But if I mean, it may be an advantage to the city to not pay their bonds. They may get a higher interest rate than I can get. It may be my advantage if it's wastewater to do whatever we would do for anybody else's wastewater and put that infrastructure in. I mean, because it's city, just like it would be anywhere else. So I mean, I hear your point. I'm just saying that's a good concession. I don't know that that's necessarily something I need to be doing.
Yeah.
Commissioner.
You know,
I say I
I've
mean
only
the
been,
city.
I've only in my time here been involved in one project of, at least from a landmass standpoint of this side, and that was Windsong, when that came through. And I don't recall us as a city funding a whole lot of improvements in Windsong.
No, the difference to me though, the difference to me is, and I'll let you finish, but the difference to me is that was not annexed land, that was a different kind of purpose and a different kind of property. And I see Windsong and this project as two different things, personally.
I don't, and that's something we'll discuss as we go down the road here. You know, I look at the development report we have in our packet today, and there's 15 projects in there that aren't coming here for help. And I've got hotels and restaurants and you name it. I'm not at all in favor of the interlocal. To split you play out the numbers, and there's $50 billion in play over 30-some years, and why? I don't even know why we even go that route. Now, I'm somewhat intrigued about, okay, what can we do to prime the pump? But that's about as far as I feel comfortable having a city go without either a referendum or something that says, yes, we as a city want to invest millions of dollars in a private development. I'm staggered by the projections of what could occur here in 3 years. And I don't even begin to understand how you're going to build the equivalent of 10 C&L buildings there in 3 years. I've got a bridge in Brooklyn if you want to go that route. I'm not there. And if incrementally we could help in some way, shape, or form, I'm willing to discuss that. But as this was presented, I went through that. I said, why would we do that? There isn't. I don't want to be chasing a shiny object. You never catch stuff like that. I gave my cat. It's fun to do when you jump around, and that doesn't happen. I'm not. This is way over optimistic of anything I can see happening here in this time frame. And if we're doing this investment to see it happen quicker, the marketplace is going to decide whether that happens quicker or not. Because it's still going to take private investment to come in here and build those buildings. Build 800,000 square feet of office and 300,000 square feet of retail. That's 10 times what the Unicorp project was. In 3 years, in 5 years, even in 10 years. I could approach this incrementally, but not at a scale that's being discussed. And Mr. Mayor, I think we do agree on one thing, that there are things that the city does very well. And I agree that usually infrastructure are the things that we do best of all. Real estate investment is things that we don't do very well.
And Tom, for me, there is a big difference, and I know this is perceived as a private development, but there's a ton of public land. This was a neighborhood that was purchased, that a large owner or a large property owner owns most of the neighborhood. But, we put sewers in communities, and that benefits who? I don't know, at the end of the day, it benefits us to have a sewer in that community.
But we do it, and
If all of that acres, if those people, let's forget that there's not a private developer. Let's say that all those people were 52 acres in Winter Park, and they said, we want to come into Winter Park. We'd have gone through an annexation process, and at some point, just as happened in numerous other transactions, they just said, we want sewers, and we want your electricity, and we want all this to be fully part of Winter Park. And whether it's a private developer or not, we would say something to those people. We'd say,
and
probably.
But here's my nuance that I want not to be missed. We would have done that evaluation ahead of time of that residential area and said it's either worth bringing into the city or not. And we would have made those calculations ahead of time and said, yes, for whatever reason, whether it's the tax base or whether it's the donut hole, or it might have been something, we would have made those kind of calculations and said, yes, it's either worth bringing that into the city or not. We brought this in, and this incentive program is based on, we're going to have a build out equal to 25% of our current non-residential tax base in 3 to 5 years. Mr. Mayor, I don't believe that for a minute. I mean, that is beyond any economic forecast that I read anywhere. And I'm not an economist, I'm not a banker, but to say that we're going to put that much development in 3 to 5 years, and we're willing to enter into an agreement that says we're going to fund that across 35 years with tens of millions of dollars, I'm not there. I want to explore with you some incremental things that I think we could do. But at this scale, I'm not there.
Well, you and me both, we're not, I think we're saying
We're
the
not
same
there,
thing, we're just,
we may not be there.
we're getting to the
for
same
reasons.
destination, we just may be coming at it.
I got that.
And it's a non-action item, so I'm assuming that removing consideration of the interlocal agreement is not an option to us at this point. I mean, that's where I'm at. I would never commit to 35 years of giving back a portion of ad valorem taxes, never. For me, what we can do.
Well, that's a term, let's be clear, I don't know if that's.
Well, that's true.
As it's
An
currently
amount
presented.
equal to, not margin of fund, to clarify, but the point is, in reality, that is what we are doing. And I don't think that's in the best interest of the city. I don't want to enter into any long-term agreement to do this. And so for me to talk about anything beyond what can we do within our existing available programs for electric, within our impact fees for sewer, within the excess funds that we may have available from our general fund in a year that we choose to do something that might benefit this project and other projects around it. To me, that's where I'm at, is I don't want to create a situation where we are disadvantaging other businesses and developments in this town, where we are reducing services on our existing citizens, because the fact of the matter is, if you provide goods and services within the existing capacity, then somebody's getting shortchanged, and I'm not comfortable with that. So for me, I would take it off the table tonight if I could, and we can't. So I would say that anything that comes back looking like this to me is still a no from me, nothing long-term. That's from my perspective.
Well, not only do I not want to be a realtor, but I don't want to be a banker. And so for me, this doesn't get it, but at the same time, I'm not ready to take it off the table. I'd like for us to get some ground where we can all agree and move forward. I really want to see this go. I really want to see it work. I don't know what we can do as a city, but I'm all for sitting down and trying to figure that out. So I do think that there's a lot of places we can still look and go. I kept saying to people, what have we done to help other people? And then I started thinking, well, you know, we do something all the time. We have parks out there, we have roads out there. We do things that people just believe we should be doing. So we need to think about what have we been doing as a community to serve people, whether it's, you know, whatever it might be. There's got to be a list of those things, and we need to start thinking that way. And from those kinds of things, think, how can we make that be part of this community? So I'd like us to look at it sort of that way, and maybe, again, look at what's happened in other places. But I had a really hard time with the idea of sharing revenue. That was a difficult time for me to figure out, and when I tried explaining it to people in my own house, they didn't buy it. So I figured if I couldn't explain it to somebody, it wasn't going to be explained to other people. So I need something that makes better sense to me, not just as a commissioner, but as a person who's a part of the city.
You know, I'm not crazy about just the way it exists, and I think we're pretty consistent there, right? But I also want to address the fact that Commissioner McMahon said there's 15 other things going on in the city, and none of them are here for help, but they all have been here for help. The Alphon Inn, we dealt with parking.
And
Marlowe's-
paving and.
paving. Marlowe's Tavern didn't have a liquor permit, we had a liquor permit. We addressed parking issues for Lakeside. We did a conditional use drive-through bank for Borders. So we do things for people all the time. And I think that's what, and I agree, this is a scale that we're not used to.
That level of commitment, I'm up to.
But you have to understand too, but let's look at what a conditional use to add tellers to the back of the old Word bookstore does to that scale. You know, it scales. It doesn't scale this one, I agree. But it is, we do things for people all the time. I think, Randy, what are we talking, Fairbanks sewer project, $9 million? Right. I mean, it's $9 million. So we do things, that is not out of the goodness of our heart, that is because that needs to be done, and that can help us build that out, which will eventually help the tax revenues of the city and, you know, and help us over there. So, you know, I've seen emails come across, and I'm also frankly quite disturbed that it's an individual that most of the vitriol is against, and not the project, it's this person's development, and that's, you know, we've approved projects.
And I don't think anybody ever
We've
read
approved
those.
projects, and up here, all of us, that have been for supporters of ours during our election campaigns, and for people who didn't support us. And hopefully, we've all looked at those projects and said, we're looking at it because these are good for the city or bad for the city. So, that I had a bit of an issue with. But as far as the amount, I'm not crazy about 35 years. I think that's great. The amount, the total amount, I think we need to address that. What I did like about it was that it's incremental revenue. You know, I keep trying to tell people, they say, well, you know, the services you're talking about, you're looking at taking money from us. No, we're not. We get $60,000 a year from home acres right now in general fund tax, property taxes, $60,000. If we can help incentivize the development over there, it's incremental tax revenue. It's not money coming out of anybody's pocket in the city of Winter Park. It's incremental revenue, and it's a share. And I don't like those numbers. I don't like the 75 split, but I'd also like to front-end, if we do something, front-end load it. I like the idea of the incremental revenue. I don't want to go into a bond issue for $9 million to lay infrastructure. So that part of it I do like, and I appreciate. We're not on the hook for anything. That's what I think some people have to understand too. I don't believe we're going to build this thing out in 3 years. I get it. But we're not on, you know, we're not front-end loading for 3 years either. We're not paying for all that infrastructure for 3 years. So some of that I like. There's aspects of this that I do like. There's aspects I don't. It's control of soft costs is an issue. The time, the total dollar amount is an issue. The special purpose entity that Larry and I were speaking about before, controlled by the bondholders, that's an issue for me. I mean, if they can come in and there's the trust fund and they have control of the trust fund and we put money into it, I mean, that's a big issue. So, I don't like this thing the way it is. I'd like it to go back. I'd like there to be work on it. But again, I do like the incentivization aspect of it. I like that it's incremental. And I like that we're not on the hook for anything if it doesn't get. So, that is my 2 cents.
But we're not taking an action here tonight. I guess the commission and staff can bring to us proposals and various things. I would propose we start over and we look at a different approach to accomplishing similar things. And I also don't know that we as a city are obligated to do the whole thing. I think that we as a city have certain obligations. This is totally different than any property we've done because this is property that's interlaced and interspersed with city streets. That I think we did do the math when we annexed it and said it ultimately was a good thing for our city to do. And frankly, it being part of our cities, we control our destiny a whole lot better than if it was in Orange County. They could have done whatever the heck they wanted to do, and I think this puts us much more in the driver's seat. So I want to stay in the driver's seat. I certainly want to accomplish mutual goals, but I think there's certain things that we as a city are willing to do based on what we've done before. And then I think a lot of other stuff is maybe creative, but I don't have an appetite.
Well, I use a metaphor of going to Detroit. I want to make sure we're not walking to Detroit. We may not be able to take the Concord to Detroit. We certainly don't want to walk to Detroit. So I'd like to, if we can't see this thing get, the quicker it gets out of the ground, the quicker it gets up, the quicker it gets filled, it's better for everybody, it's better for the entire community. How can we do that without going over the water?
Well said. Unless there's further comments or communications about that, I think that you hear where we're at. Whether that appears in our next meeting or not is, I guess, up to staff and what they think they can provide to us.
I'm gonna go to the city commissioner reports unless there's anything else on this.